Okay, everybody, we are live. Woo! Welcome. We have an incredible few minutes here to get to know a really fascinating woman and to learn from her how God's story and her story have just coalesced in a really beautiful way. And as we listen, I know because I've already had the privilege of talking with her a little bit that you're going to also learn more about your own story and what your own calling might be. So I want to welcome Quantrilla Ard. She's actually Dr. Quantrilla Ard. And I'm going to tell you a couple of things about Quantrilla, but who likes to be called Quanny. But first, welcome, Quanny. I'm so glad to have this chance to connect with you today.
You so much. I love being here with you.
Quantrilla Ard is, I'm going to give you the I've gotten to know her version of her bio. She is, first of all, a contributor to Tyndale's Every Woman's Bible, which comes out May 7th. So just a couple more days. Woo! You can read a more formal bio there about her. But some of the things that fascinate me about Quanny are that she, from her own journey with grief, has created an online ministry that really comes alongside people who are experiencing grief. And the name I love, it's all grief to me. And maybe we'll dig into that later because I've been thinking about that. And then also, she's a professor of medicine at Morehouse School of Medicine. And this woman just, there's like lots of degrees after her name, but more than that, there's lots of passion in her heart. And what she wrote about, what you wrote about, Quanny, and the Every Woman's Story community was about this idea of stepping forward when God invites us to use the gift that He's given. So, welcome. I'm going to ask you a couple get to know you questions, but then what I really want all of us to get to experience is kind of your story of how God guided you to some of the things that you are now doing that are having a powerful impact on other people. So, which we call our Believe, Belong, Become story. Mm-hmm. Okay. But to get to know you better, first of all, Quanny knows that I am in an invisible coffee shop with an invisible cup. I am in a coffee shop. And so we're having coffee with you, Quanny. It is so fun. And I would love to know if you were choosing a part of the Bible to read and you had to choose between Psalms and Proverbs, which one would you choose and why?
Oh, man. So that was a tough question, but I think Psalms wins out a tad bit ahead of Proverbs, mainly because I think I am like a modern day David in terms of the way he wrote, the way he emotes. One of the biggest compliments I've ever gotten is that someone said that they compared my writing to the Psalms. And I was like, whoa. And it just kind of spoke to me. And I was like, well, I spent a lot of time there. So maybe that has a big influence on my life. So yeah, it's definitely the Psalms for me. I feel like I'm always kind of writing some type of song to God, whether it's a prayer, whether it's Thanksgiving, and I just see myself reflected in those Psalms. So
That is beautiful. And yes, what a compliment. Oh my goodness.
I mean, like, really?
I wonder, how do you find that, like for people who are, so you are an expert in grief, and for people who are grieving something, it could be a loss of a loved one, it could be a change in their life that they didn't anticipate. Um, Psalms, like you were saying, you write songs to God. How might that approach be of help to be like a psalm writer type of person?
Well, one of the ways is that it really helps us process what we are experiencing. And even if we don't have the exact language, a lot of times people are like, oh, I don't have the language. Well, you have the language. It may not be the exact language, right? Writing those things out gives you the opportunity to process what's going on in the world. We can tend to be very like we keep everything inside. It's in our head, kind of like struggling and worrying between the things that are going on in our head. And once we just kind of once we put it, it gives us a free ourselves, right? And it takes off some of the burden of feeling that no one understands. You have this heavy weight, and sometimes writing those things out really is a practice of taking some of that weight off of yourself.
Beautiful. You really named some of the things that would get in my way of trying to process emotion by writing like the Psalms, because I would think, oh my goodness, this isn't going to sound right. You know, the other thing though is I wonder about how I know sometimes, like if I'm having an emotion that people would label as a negative emotion, that I don't want to express it. You know, it's like, oh, it's not okay. I mean, even though it's in the Psalms and we all know that, it still feels like, oh, but if I wrote it down, then it's real.
Right.
And yeah.
That's also true in the positive sense, right? Because we do try to dismiss how we feel. And it is because of the grief norms that we have become accustomed to. And, because it may be attached to a negative, emotion, does not mean it's not normal, right? So those are the types of stories that I want to tell around grief. That, yeah, it may not be a positive emotion, but it is a normal, natural human emotion. And as you get them out, as you release them, that is a way to help you cope and to help you manage and walk through your grief.
So just the skill of writing our own songs to God, just that is worthwhile.
Right.
Wow.
Anyway.
Yeah. So I just want everybody to know, if you've just been joining us, that Quanny, Dr. Quantrilla Ard, who I'm speaking with, leads a ministry that she founded. And one of the places that people can connect online is called It's All Grief to Me. How did people find you if they want to learn more about expressing grief and what have you?
So there is a community on Facebook called It's All Grief to Me. So you can request to join the community. And I have an Instagram account also called It's All Grief to Me, and also a Twitter account. So you can follow any of those accounts to just kind of, really get some encouraging content. And the community on Facebook, it's a group where there are other people who are grieving, right? And it's not just me sharing the things that I've gone through, but there are other people in there who are being vulnerable as well and sharing some of their stories as well. So I feel that that is super valuable. When we grieve in community, it helps us to grow. It helps us to lessen that feeling of isolation and tightness in our chest,
Mm.
We are able to connect with other people who can relate.
Even as you were talking about emotions, and they may not be ones we want, but they are natural, normal human emotions. That's exactly what I was thinking. I'm like, oh, I want a friend like Quanny alongside the next time I'm having a difficult emotion, to normalize it and go, you know what, you're human, and that's okay, and that's good. That's part of you being alive, to experience good things too. So that online community sounds amazing. Well, while I could spend this entire time just asking you about grief, because I've looked at those top stressors in our lives, and most of them are around loss of some kind, and so we could go there. But what we really love to focus on here is to kind of let everybody know that they have a seat at Jesus's table, and to pull up that chair, like I've got my little coffee here as I'm listening to you, and to discover more of our stories as we hear more about how God has worked through another person's story. And so I am fascinated by how you got this way, by how you got to be a person who has enough, not only for herself and her own family, but to be able to pour into others, and not just intellectually, which you clearly have, but holistically. Like, this is you wanting to make a difference in the world, and you're doing it. So in the middle of the Every Woman's Bible, which is coming up, we have a 16-page insert that's called What is My Purpose? And it walks people through a Bible-based pattern of how people in the Bible become greatly used by God, like you're being greatly, effective. And I had these three stages: believe, belong, and become. And really, before any of those happen, it's befriend. And God befriends us, and or brings somebody into our life to say, "Here, you can do it." I want to hear your story, Quantrilla. How did you become all these letters, all this passion, all this courage, and then also you're like a regular person too? Yeah.
Well, I think it's so appropriate that, we start with my mother, another woman, right? Another woman's story. And just to elevate here that, it's not lost on me the impact that we have as women on other women, whether it's a mom, whether it's a sister, whether it's a friend, whether it's a coworker. Um, we have such impact as women on other women. And I just want to make sure we highlight that and elevate that here. So if you're listening, you are a woman, you have impact, you have influence. So my story begins with my mom and the influence and the impact that she had on my life. And from a very young age, I watched her develop and grow her relationship with God. And for those of you who may not know, my mother had a terminal illness. And so I grew up with a mom who looked healthy kind of on the outside, but there was something going on in her body on the inside that was, robbing her of her vitality. And so as I began to grow older, I lost my mom. It was right after I graduated from college. And so for 22 years, I had someone who poured into me. So I had a model of what that looked like. And it wasn't, always kind of the sit down, you must do this type of thing. But, when the Bible talks about beholding and becoming changed, like that's literally how she lived her faith out. And so I learned so much from her just by observing her. And so when she passed away, it was a huge moment for me because I had lost my person. Not only had I lost my mother, but I had lost a friend, I had lost a confidant, and I had lost someone who was really germane to my faith process, right? And so I almost had to go through this rebirth or reawakening or kind of like a reset because I really didn't know who I was in Christ without her. And that led me to really doing some hard thinking, some hard, self-analysis. And some of that had to do with, well, okay, what does my faith look like now that I've believed in this God and I've asked and prayed for him to heal my mother? And the answer wasn't yes. Or the answer wasn't the way I wanted the yes to look, right? So I had to reframe what faith looked like. I had to develop my own faith and not just something that was attached to what I had seen my mother do, because she had to develop her own faith as well. So the road was, it was a little bumpy, it was a little difficult, but in all of that, in that loss and in that pain, and as an only child, I didn't have siblings to lean on. I didn't have, my father also was grieving his wife. And so, he didn't have the capacity to show up for me the way I needed him to. So it was almost like losing two parents at once. And so I really had to navigate these things alone. I had to navigate building faith from nothing. And it was those silent times, those lonely times in which I was able to develop this relationship with God. And so when he said, I would like to use you to help other people, excuse me, I'm thinking to myself, Lord, no, not me. I'm still trying to figure this thing out. And God says, well, I've equipped you, right, in a special way because the things that you learned from your mother, the things that you um, drew from her, the things that actually were passed on to you through her are the things that I'm going to use to help other people who are grieving. And my mother had grieved a lot. She had a really difficult childhood. So, there were things I learned from her that are helping me now to help other people and to help myself. And then I realized as God was teaching me and connecting with me and building this relationship with me, that there were things about grief that weren't really taught to us well, especially in our faith community, right? A lot of times there's this thing where we would like to kind of spiritually bypass grief, right? Oh, we know we'll see our loved ones again, or oh, God is there, everything happens for a reason. While these things may be factual, they are not helpful to someone who is grieving because it diminishes the process that they need to go through. And so God had really pulled back those layers and revealed to me ways to help people navigate their grief journeys, and to really look at grief as a companion and a teacher rather than this big, hairy, scary intruder that completely, like, devastates everything in its wake, right? Because as we reframe our grief, we are then able to reframe our faith journey. Because again, grief is not just attached to the death of a loved one, right? There are dreams deferred, you know, things happen that we just don't have control over. People's relationships are kind of being taken away from them. So there's so many ways we can experience grief, and how we experience our grief is directly related to our faith journey. Because who's the first person we want to blame when things go wrong? God. you know so, and again, it's so interesting that God has given me this revelation about it, because they're like, well, this doesn't make any sense, right? Like, no, grief is horrible, I hate it, blah blah blah. And yes, while I do not believe that God is the author of our pain, and I with my whole heart, I don't ever believe that God intended for us to experience this. Even in our human experience, God still provides us ways to navigate our grief in a way that we can grieve well.
So listening to your story, first of all, I get that. I'm just coming awake to the idea that you can't really have joy unless you also have sorrow. And so to be able to be companions with sorrow sometimes, because also then other times I get to be a companion with joy, So I'm at the beginning level of some of this, but the what you were talking about in terms of your journey, you lost your mother went, on to her glory when you were just graduated from college. Did anybody come alongside you? I mean, that is an incredible revelation you had, that she taught you a whole lot of what you could now take forward in your own way. And I'm just wondering who was with you on that part of your journey?
Oh, that's a good question. My mother was kind of the um so when you're playing Jenga, right, there's a block that you just don't pull out because the whole tower will fall over. So, my mother was that block. And when she passed, our family really took a hit. And so everyone was trying to navigate their grief in their own ways. And while they were there physically, everybody had other things going on. So it was really hard for me to pick up the phone and say, hey, I need you. Can you help me? Because I didn't want to disturb, their grief journey. And the one person who I felt like I shouldn't have had to ask, shouldn't have had to ask my dad, but there was this realization that, girlfriend, he is not going to be able to help you through this. You are going to have to dig deep into the things that were deposited inside of you. And you are going to have to literally hold on to God's unchanging hand for yourself. And I think that experience has been so fruitful for me. It's been extremely painful, but it's been fruitful for me because when subsequent losses came, I didn't go back to the feeling of, oh, I'm so alone. Oh, there's no one here to help me, right? Because God had already taught me how to do that in the absence of the support that I felt I needed. So they were there, there were people that were there, along the journey, but that was the work of the Holy Spirit and me by ourselves.
It makes me think of the gift that a prophet, when I think about people in the Bible, you're like, who are the people who ended up like that with God? And often they were prophets. And you think about poor Elijah, being fed by birds or whatever. And so I'm just curious, has that been part of how you've sensed God has wired you?
It is. And it's so funny because one of the things that I've always struggled with is abandonment. I'm like, Lord, why? Why does it feel like, someone will come into my life for a season, or they'll come into my life for a couple months or a couple years, and they are gone? And I'm like, Lord, now, I have a soft spot here. Why is this like this? But there is a dependence and a reliance on God that I needed to develop to be able to do this work, because there are other people who may need to know that it's okay, that God is literally sufficient to meet every need, whether it be companionship, whether it be finances, whether it be, leading you into purpose, whatever those things are. God literally allowed me to find out who he was to me when there were no buffers, there were no, there was nothing else for me to grasp a hold of besides him.
Well, we are coming close to the end of our time. And as I'm listening, I'm thinking about the Bible pattern of people who God worked through greatly. And your story is actually in this one way, where it was God and you. It makes me think of Hagar. And, there she is in the wilderness. And it makes my heart kind of clench when I think about that idea of putting your son in a place you won't watch him die. I love my son. You know what I mean? And it's just like, oh my goodness. And then God, saying, hey, I'm here. I'm here. So that is just powerful, Quanny. And it is a gift. It's you've suffered in a certain way that you're suffering, not yours. You are successful, but it's your suffering. And through that there's been a gift that comes and overflows through you. And I think that's a really interesting countercultural message, as a leader, a person who has, led different ministries, I can relate to that, because you would think it's the same thing. I think God has really done some deep work with me in terms of the idea of wanting to know I've done a good job, wanting, to hit the numbers or whatever it may be, and to really break my agreements with this idea that glory, honor, or power would go to me, because the Bible says all glory and honor and power, all ALL, goes to God. But similar to your story, it wasn't through just strength after strength after strength that led me there. It was to this idea of, no, I want you totally leaning on me. Mm-hmm. And that way, if anybody points to you, you know where to point, because you've broken the agreement. Right. Yeah, I love that. Well, you have a special gift for our folks who are here, and you get to give something away. Do you want to mention what that is?
I do. Of course I do. So I get to give my favorite version of the Every Woman's Bible, which is the Soft Gold Touch Bible. So I get to give that away. And did we decide how we were going to do it?
Well, we did. We could give it away afterwards. And but gosh, I think, how about if someone shares something about grief and how grief has formed them? I can see that could be a really good thing. So if you guys are on, or you're watching this recorded, we ask you to put in the comments, and how, again, they could reach you more personally. If it's too personal to share online, we get that. They can reach you more personally at It's All Grief to me at Facebook. And then also Instagram and X, our Twitter friend, renamed. And but yeah, if you put in the comments like that's my story, me too. I've grief has been part of my journey. We will be looking for you and contacting you online to get you the Bible. So, Quanny, I've learned a lot from you today, and I am thankful for you taking the time to think with God about what you really needed, not to numb it out, like we talked about, not to say, no, I just got to be strong, which I'm sure you felt. Because you've allowed the work that you and God have done together to be something that is instructing us. And that's a gift. So thank you so much. And, yeah. Is there any final thing that you'd want to leave with people who are viewing this?
Yes, yes, yes. My favorite thing to share with grievers is that, like almost everything else, even your grief has an expiration date. And one of my favorite verses is found in Revelation, where it says that God will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there will be no more sorrow, no more death, no more pain, because the former things have passed away. So while we must travel with the companion of grief, at some point that will end. So that's the hope that we live in.
That is good news. Thank you so much. So everyone, we just invite you to open up the Bible and to discover more of God's story, the God who's for you, just as the God who was for Quanny in her grief as a young adult, and has used that for such good for her and through her in her life. So thanks for joining us for our